Welcome to In Focus with Ejaz Haider. Our top story tonight focuses on the third India-US 2+2 ministerial dialogue, which concluded earlier today. US Secretaries of State and Defense Mike Pompeo and Mark Esper were in India for several bilateral meetings as well as ministerial dialogue. They also met India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. The dialogue focused on four themes: regional security cooperation, defense information sharing, military-to-military interactions, and defense trade. The ministerial also laid down next steps for the US-India Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership. Apart from India, the US holds such ministerial dialogues only with Japan and Australia. The two sides also finalized and signed the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, which had been in the pipeline for over a decade. For the US, China has emerged over Trump's presidency as not just a strategic rival, but an adversary. India itself has been in a tense standoff with China since May this year. But much of the goodies and defense cooperation that India is looking for and at will be directed towards Pakistan. The security alignments in the region pushed by the United States are increasingly seeking to push countries in this region and Asia-Pacific in general into making binary choices, China or the US. Pompeo, left for Sri Lanka, is asking Colombo to make just such a choice. These developments pose new challenges for Pakistan. To discuss those challenges, I'm joined by Dr. Naeem, a former brigadier who served as Director of Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs at the Strategic Plans Division, Dr. Adil Sultan, a former Air Commodore who is now Dean of Strategic Studies Department at the Air University. Thank you to both my panelists. Let me begin with Dr. Salik here. Dr. Salik, a few things, a kind of overview of BECA, because it was, as I said in my opening, it was under discussion for over a decade. But previously, it was the Indian security establishment that wasn't particularly, interested in it and had raised several concerns. So, what has changed now, and how do you look at it in terms of what it does have for India?
I think the change has come basically because of the ongoing standoff between India and China in Ladakh. I think that has prompted India to go ahead and finalize this agreement. They had certain reservations because India has always tried to maintain its strategic autonomy. But after this agreement, as one of India's very prominent security analysts, Praveen Soni, has said, that it will virtually mean a defense alliance between US and India. So that will mean that their strategic autonomy will be gone. India will have to compromise and then defer to America's preferences as well. Because obviously everyone knows that there are no free lunches in the world. If the Americans are giving access to India to this real-time information, through their satellite system and the geospatial maps and everything, there will be some cost to it. But I think India, probably because of the embarrassment it has faced vis-a-vis China, it wanted to compensate for that and go for it. And probably because of that background, I think those voices opposing this agreement within India would also have been muted. Now, coming to what does it really mean? Because this agreement provides India real-time access to America's satellite-based information system, as well as the geospatial maps, which will mean that it will increase the accuracy of India's standoff weapons like ballistic and cruise missiles and any other standoff weapons, and particularly the unarmed drones which India is acquiring from the United States. The Predators and others, they also get their information for accurate engagement of targets with the help of these geospatial maps and the satellite information. So that will mean that the lethality and accuracy of India's delivery systems would increase, which would have serious impact on Pakistan. and we don't know yet how much is the sweep of this information, because it will also provide India with the real-time information about movement of Pakistan's forces that will facilitate their real-time target acquisition. So the ISR capabilities which India was lacking so far, those will be enhanced, and that will further augment India's capability and support their intentions for a preemptive first strike against Pakistan.
Right. Let me pull in Dr. Adil Sultan here. Dr. Sultan, is there a possibility that, for instance, as I said in my opening, much of India's force configuration is against Pakistan? Of course, they've been in a tense standoff with China since May this year, but that's a new development, and it'll take them a while to actually develop the sort of ecosystem there. But they already have an established habitat against Pakistan, 3 strike corps and the rest of it, and there are various assets directed against Pakistan. So in the event, let me go back, for instance, to the Balakot strike. Now, in the event that India wants to do something like that now with this Becca, do you think it'll have an advantage? One. Secondly, is it possible that the US says to India, well, we can provide you intelligence with reference to X state, but not Y state. And so we are providing you this capability more in relation to China than in relation to Pakistan. So give us a sense of how that's going to play out.
Yeah, thank you, Ejaz. First, about this distinction between whether the United States would be providing information about state X or Y. I think India sees China, India as the 2 states or a hyphenated front. So whatever they must have negotiated, and I don't think so they will distinguish between the two, because they project that both China and Pakistan are collectively a threat for them. On the issue of like Balakot strike that you mentioned, we always knew India has always been claiming that it has precision weapons, and their spice bombs and the other equipment they have. They already had the capability. So this Bika probably is not going to enhance that conventional capability in that sense, because they have those kinds of weapons which they can carry out precision strikes. The strikes fail because of certain other reasons, because of the bad weather and Modi, which termed as a cloud theory. So I'll refer to what Dr. Salik was also pointing out about their counterforce temptations also, and you briefly also mentioned. I think that's more important, because one is the political aspect, and we are talking about the military aspect. Lately, we have been hearing from the Indian side about the increased chatter of possible counterforce strikes against Pakistan. So that's a worrying point, I think, because through this agreement and other agreements also, so they, as per the reports, they will have top secret information, surveillance reports from the United States that would be shared with India. So if that kind of information is shared with India, and they have a complete situational awareness about the strategic assets of Pakistan, so they can probably contemplate or at least threaten Pakistan with more credible kind of counterforce strike, which we continue to hear about this, that they might give up their no force use doctrine also, and they might contemplate a counterforce preemptive strike against Pakistan. So that's the point, I think. Not much on the conventional side, I see, because they already have those kind of capabilities for precision strikes. But having this capability and projecting against Pakistan, now that they have the potential, that's more worrying, and that's where they are likely to play this capability also.
Right. Before I back to Dr. Salik, let me say that this Captain Vikram Mahajan, who's a director aerospace and defense at the United States-India Strategic Partnership Forum, and I quote from what he has said: data received under the agreement will be useful for long-range navigation and missile targeting with enhanced accuracy. Given the current geopolitical situation, this data will be relevant on both the northern and western borders of India. So that's as far as the perception is concerned, northern and western borders. And western borders obviously are all about Pakistan. Dr. Salik, You mentioned Praveen Sawhney. Praveen Sawhney's latest article for Wire actually is fairly critical of this Becca agreement. He has, in fact, given lots of reasons of how the United States could actually, not that it intends to, but it will have the capability to disrupt the kill chain of the Indian military. Would you want to say something about that in terms of how feasible his argument is with reference to that?
That's what I was trying to say, that all these facilities which are provided are not cost-free. There are downsides to it, and it depends how long this bonhomie between India and US goes on. Because if there is any difference of opinion, there is some problem, some friction between the two sides, the Americans can also withhold information, and that will be a big setback, because once you get dependent on this kind of information facility, if it is taken away even temporarily, that will set back all your plans. But I don't foresee the way the relationship is developing at the moment. As you mentioned in the beginning also, that this kind of agreement the US already has with Japan and Australia, and now India is the fourth partner of the Quad. So once they have all these bilateral exchange agreement with the Quad partners, that will set the foundation for what we are hearing from some quarters, that the Quad should now be turned into a proper defense alliance on the lines of NATO. So that's where I think it is headed to. And if it is changed into a formal defense alliance, then it will have different repercussions. And on the US side also, I think the value they assign to this, just look at the timing. It is hardly 1 week before the US elections, and in a hurry, they have come back to India for this 2+2 dialogue and signed this agreement, which had been pending for a long time. So I think they have even catered for the election results if they are not favorable to them, and then the fait accompli would be available to the incoming administration as well. It reminds me of the parting kick which President Clinton had given Pakistan just to appease India, while he was just about to leave his presidency. He had imposed MTCR-related sanctions on Pakistan. So I think that this is a similar kind of thing. This is the parting favor which Trump administration wants to do with India, unless, of course, they come back after the elections into the White House. Then obviously there will be further momentum to this cooperation.
Right. Dr. Adil Sultan, you mentioned ISR. Now, before this whole digital thing, there used to be a very common saying in the military that time spent on reconnaissance is never wasted. Now, ISR is now, as you know, is basically the central, point, shall I say, there's a centrality to it in terms of operational planning and execution and the rest of it. Now, if India's ISR capabilities are increased by this arrangement, what options do we have? What can we rely on? Because if you have total situational awareness of the battle space, then obviously you have a great advantage.
That's worrying, because we do not have that kind of potential in the space the way India has emerged or established itself in the space. Irrespective of the United States cooperation, India has its indigenous capacity also to have this qualitative ISR edge over Pakistan. That definitely provides them with an edge, but over a period of time, and now that we are hearing the way the BK is being projected, as if India didn't have anything, and they will have access to everything from the United States. So that also raises a question about India's indigenous potential. Was it so bad that they needed it desperately from the United States? I don't think so. They had some capability, but this will enhance them. So for Pakistan, there are two things. Of course, for military operations, you need that kind of clarity and situational awareness to plan your missions and strikes, whatever you want to do. But there's also, we must also think that we are not contemplating any offensive doctrines against India. So we do not have that kind of pressures to justify our doctrinal developments, because the way India is projecting, the way India is flaunting its military potential, and it wants to build that capability and emerge or signal to its neighbors that now they have complete superiority in space, air, and land, and they can take punitive measures against other countries, the smaller neighbors. So that's the doctrinal approach or the mindset. That's the difference between Pakistan and India. But having said that, to defend yourself, you need to have very clear situational awareness about your adversary, what it is doing. And Pakistan would have to definitely fast track its space program, or do collaboration, launch some satellites, or indulge in some kind of arrangements, information sharing arrangement with its allies, or if it is possible. So that is a must for Pakistan also, because otherwise that would be a major disadvantage for Pakistan in the future crisis.
Right. That was Adil Sultan speaking with us. Let me go back to Dr. Salik. Dr. Salik, another thing that I want to draw your attention to, and unfortunately, I haven't seen much debate on this in our media or general sort of expert commentary. The use of drones, both the combat drones as well as the kamikaze drones in the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, has been very fascinating. And to a very large extent, the manner in which these drones have been deployed and employed have raised a number of questions with reference to armor concentration and infantry fighting vehicles, as also radars. Now, with obviously, military observers have been observing these developments. India is going for these drones also, in combination with everything that it will get in terms of real-time data, ISR capabilities. Give me a sense of whether there are any lessons for us here in terms of the use of drones and the deployment and employment of armor and mechanized infantry.
The drones are technology of the future, and they'll be used in a variety of ways in any future conflict in the world. We have seen recently in this Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict. Before that, we have seen the drone strikes in the Afghan war and in the borderlands of Pakistan, and their accuracy is increasing. Now the new concepts of drone swarms. The Chinese have very advanced drone technologies. So is Turkey and other countries. They are also building up there. So Pakistan has only option to have effective deterrence in terms of its own drone capability. Only then India can be deterred. But still, I think we were talking about a full-fledged war or a conflict, active conflict, where the drones will play a role in striking at the armored and mechanized forces and make them more vulnerable. But what has happened, we have seen throughout the annals of history, that in military technology, no technology continues to have an advantage for a long time. The countermeasures are developed very soon, and there will be counters to the drones as well. But at the moment, I think what we should be looking at is another possibility. What I suspect is that in a future crisis like Balakot crisis, I think the Indians, having learnt lessons from their bitter experience of the past, they might next time try this so-called surgical strike through drones. Because in case of a drone being shot down, you have no fear of losing a pilot to the enemy, which can then be used as a bargaining chip.
Precisely, and you're right. Failure has lessons. Success usually, unfortunately, especially in our case, frankly, leads to complacency. And I'm more concerned about having a complacent attitude. And I think it'll be, disastrous if we become complacent. And I also agree with you with reference to this constant sort of, seesaw between offensive and defensive capabilities. But what we have witnessed is that, the armor and the mechanized infantry without close air support and without real-time ISR, turned out to be sitting ducks for these drones.
It also depends on the situation and the professionalism of the militaries involved also. And probably, I think they had not catered for this threat. Had they known that this such a potent threat can be posed by these drones, they would have taken some countermeasures in the form of local air defense cover and maybe the air cover to counter these drones. But it appeared that they were not prepared for this, and that is why this came as a surprise. Now, this is a template which is available to rest of the militaries, and they will, I think, devise methods to guard against such kind of a threat in any future conflict.
Right. Stay with me, Dr. Salik. I'm also now joined by Dr. Kamran Bokhari, who is Director of Analytical Development at the Center for Global Policy. Thank you, Dr. Kamran Bokhari. We were discussing, of course, the 2+2 ministerial dialogue and what has come out of this, the Becca agreement, which is the fourth such agreement. It was being discussed for over a decade, but there were concerns, interestingly, on the Indian side, securities establishment. But now this has been inked. Give me your reading of how you look at it. There have been some comment, for instance, from Praveen Soni, who's looked at it, and he thinks that the United States will have the capability, if they want to actually disrupt the Indian military skill chain. Not that they will, but they intend to, but the capability is there. So how do you look at this whole sort of quid pro quo here?
So Ejaz, that's a very important question, because what we have is the Indians are now sort of in between embarking on the ability to continue to do unilateral action, and then being part of a bilateral or multilateral context in which all sorts of issues come up. I mean, if you have that closeness, as Praveen Soni was arguing, then do you retain the capability to act unilaterally in military situations if you're that well integrated? And even before we get there, right now, this is the latest stage. Becca is the latest stage between the U.S. and the Indian militaries to work more closely. This has to do with, geospatial intelligence sharing, and of course, a lot of what, goes by the crude, rubric of digital warfare. So I think it's not very clear. I think we don't need to jump to conclusions. The Indians have to decide at a strategic level how they're going to be able to have their cake and eat it, benefit from the intelligence sharing from the Americans, yet be able to act on their own when they need to, without the concerns that Praveen was talking about, in the sense of the Americans having sort of inroads into their systems.
Now, here's another thing. The manner in which, and I said this in my opening, that was before you joined us, that the U.S.-China relations, obviously, and we have spoken about this on this program before also, that it's no more simply about rivalry as a strategic rival, but it's now a strategic adversary, or at least that's how the Trump administration looks at it. A new administration might nuance it a bit, but more or less it has a bipartisan support. So given this, the United States is now asking regional powers, and Pompeo has gone to Sri Lanka. Before going to Sri Lanka, State Department basically said to Colombo, well, you got to make the right choices with reference to China. So the entire security architecture is being pushed into, a place where regional countries, both in this region and Asia Pacific, are being almost forced into making these binary choices. And that's actually going to, it'll become a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of a conflictual paradigm between the United States and China.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing that you point out, the trip to Sri Lanka and the Maldives. I was speaking to a colleague yesterday who has more eyes on the Indo-Pacific than I do, and he made an interesting comment. He said, look, this isn't one theater, and so for the U.S. to say, okay, Pacific Command becomes Indo-Pacific Command, at a high level that looks really good, but what does it really mean? And I think that this trip is basically shining light on what it means is that the Indian Ocean Basin is sort of one battle space where India is the main partner of the United States. And quite frankly, I think that because of the Chinese having a head start in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Sri Lanka, I think this is sort of the United States is only now coming around to responding to that in any sense of proportion or significance. So I think here the countries, obviously, to answer your question, they don't have many choices. I mean, the Indians have two different fronts to deal with. There is the Pakistani front where they don't need the United States. There is the Chinese front where they do need the United States. And so the question is, which threat is going to be more imminent, and how do they balance that? I mean, you and I have talked about this in the Kashmir battle box, the two fronts, the LAC and the LOC, magnify that to the entire Indian Ocean Basin, because it isn't just the Himalayas. The Chinese are in the Indian Ocean.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Kamran Bokhari speaking with us. Before I wrap up, Dr. Salik, very quickly, is there something you want to add to what Kamran was saying?
I think there already have been moves to woo Sri Lanka, because Japan and India have promised to build infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka. And now the Americans have come in. So I don't know whether the Sri Lankans are playing clever and trying to get best of both worlds, luring in Chinese and investment, and then now the US-led Quad countries, or whether the Americans are now trying to throw their weight around and trying to ask the Sri Lankans to have a balance between the US and Chinese presence on the island, to turn it more or less into a neutral space. I think that's an interesting development, and it is yet to be seen how does it turn out to be, because would the Chinese also raise the stakes, or the Americans will make an ingress into Sri Lanka.
Right. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Naeem Salik speaking with us. We shall take a short break and return to talk about 27th October, which is Kashmir's Black Day. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. 27th October marks the day Kashmir's latest occupation began. The first in modern history started with 1846 with the sale of Jammu and Kashmir to a non-Kashmiri Dogra family for services to the British Raj. The second on this day, when the Dogra ruler, who had lost all authority in the areas of Mirpur, Punch and Muzaffarabad, signed a dubious instrument of accession and invited Indian troops into Kashmir. It was all planned, according to a 10th August 1948 report in Times, London. And I quote from that report, 237,000 Muslims were systematically exterminated in the Jammu region by the forces of the Dogra state headed by the Maharaja in person and aided by Hindus and Sikhs, unquote. This massacre began 9 days before Hari Singh invited Indian troops into Kashmir. Eminent Indian journalist Saeed Naqvi, in his book Being the Other, The Muslims in India, wrote this: the lid on these massacres was lifted by Ved Bhasin since late, and a few journalists of that time, but like the collective silence over the pogrom in Hyderabad, the Holocaust in Jammu has been a story hidden from public view by the machinations of the very people who covertly allowed the massacres to take place. These included many in the national leadership of the Congress party at the time. The events of Hyderabad and Jammu and Kashmir revealed the emergence in New Delhi of an establishment which was indifferent to Indian Muslims, unquote. The late Mr. Bhasin made public these findings in a paper presented at Jammu University in 2003. The details are just horrific, but one thing all those who have investigated the massacre agree on: the bloodbath in the wider Jammu region and consequent migration of Muslims from the region made Muslims a minority. Just to get a sense of what that means, Muslims comprised 61% of the population before that pogrom. To discuss this, I have with me Ambassador Arif, a former Foreign Service officer whose family hailed from Jammu. Ambassador Kamal, thank you so much for being on the program. One, as far as the Black Day is concerned, 27th October, the dubious instrument of accession, that according to Alistair Lamb, no one has seen, no one really knows what it is. But quite apart from that, tell us how that impacted. One of the issues that Indians often raise is that this happened because Pakistan violated the standstill agreement. So just give us a sense of that also, and then we'll move on to the Jammu massacre.
Well, I was only 9 months old at that point in time, but this is what is the corporate memory that runs into the Jammu diaspora of the RSS entering into the Jammu domain and imposing a fascist order in spite of whatsoever we thought was a government in Srinagar run by Maharaja. And that is something that precipitated a lot of reaction elsewhere in the state. The Punch revolt was already in the making because of whatsoever the people's aspirations for self-governance and empowerment. Similar situation was boiling down in Gilgit and Baltistan. Of course, the standstill agreement that the government of Pakistan had accepted, it was testimony to the fact that Pakistan had all the intention of not intruding into the decision-making process in Jammu Kashmir. Similar time about the same respond to Maharaja's offer for a standstill agreement. So that is just a pretext, when they to really claim that Pakistan had some intentions different than what testified through the agreement that it concluded in August. It's the RSS presence all over, and of course there was non-state actors entering into the valley from the northwest. But that was a reaction to RSS, and that was not something of a breach of an agreement by the government of Pakistan in that context. Indians had, as you said, Mr. Lamb has very ably pointed out the gray areas in the process of accession, and it shows that there's no document even after 70 years to prove as to when it was signed and where it was signed. Otherwise, in spite of all that document, hue and cry, the Indians should have produced that document publicly. Now, they came with a conditional accession, and the troops landed, but landed to lead us under occupation for 72 years. Now it's the 73rd year that has just started. And it seems that whatever was the grave situation which Maharaja had pointed out or was asked to point out, that continues to persist for 7 long decades, while the people are facing the worst human rights scenario, the greatest militarization on earth in the contemporary world as well. So I think there is a limit to this kind of claims and counterclaims. When you put people back to the wall, there is always a reaction of sorts, which we may not like, which they may not like. And that is, I think, is very much in the ferment today.
Right. A number of writers, including Joseph Corbell, the father of former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, has noticed this. A number of Sir Owen Dixon, one can go on, naming those who have recorded how India constantly stonewalled the idea of a plebiscite, even though the late Pandit Nehru had given his own word that it would be done. In fact, there's also a letter, Mr. Naqvi has that letter in his book, in the chapter where he talks about the Jammu massacre, where Pandit Nehru is talking to Vallabhbhai Patel, saying that there's some people in Jammu who want to have a separate plebiscite in Jammu, but our concern is the valley. I mean, all these things are on record. But one other thing that I want to talk to you about, Ambassador Kamal, is the fact that much before the October 27th, invitation to the Indian troops and the so-called instrument of accession, Hari Singh had lost effective control of Mirpur, large areas of Punch, Muzaffarabad, Gilgit Wazarat and Gilgit Agency and those areas. So one of the things that India has constantly propagated is that, oh, this has happened because the tribal Lashkars came in. Well, the tribal Lashkars did not arrive until 5 days before this so-called instrument of accession was signed. And before that, as I said, Hari Singh had already lost control of his large areas of his state. So he was in no position to have taken any kind of decision with reference to the state or the future of its people.
Well, very right. I think if we go back into the history the pages of history that have been lost, the Jammu and Kashmir was declared a republic on 4th of October. 20 days prior to the formal proclamation of Azad Kashmir government. And the government was reconstituted on the 24th with Ibrahim Khan as the president. But on the 4th, whosoever was Anwar, a code name, and Ibrahim Khan as his prime minister, they deposed, quote unquote, the Maharaja because he has having lost the writ and having lost the support of people. And therefore, from that time till 1970s, the state subject certificate that I carry, issued in the 1960s, it states Jamhuriya Azad Kashmir. I'm just giving it as an example. It's no more called Jamhuriya Azad Kashmir, but it's the legacy of October. Therefore, you are very right that the Maharaja had already lost the writ. He had also lost support of broad masses at the grassroots level all through the state, even parts of Jammu, say Chenab Valley, of the Pir Panjal, even apart from 3 districts, Jammu, Kathua and Riyasi. He seemed to be running, in fact, from the valley to those 3 districts. And therefore, there was not much for him in terms of moral standing. And if the deposition, he was already deposed by a revolutionary government, then he had no legal standing even at that point in time, to enter into an accession agreement.
Absolutely. This is also something which Christopher Snedden has written about. But thank you so much. That was Ambassador Arif Kamal speaking with us on 27th October, which one needs to remind the world is the Black Day in Kashmir, and has to be commemorated as a Black Day. Anyway, this is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.